Hello there, and welcome to Cyber Smart. My name is Dana Mantilia. I will be your host today, and our guest is Debby Montgomery Johnson. Debby and I have spoken before, and she has a good story to be helpful. It's not a good story, but it's a story that's evolved into a way that she's been able to help tons and tons and tons of people. So Debby, why don't you share your story? I wanted to call it a romance scam, but you can expound on that a little bit and tell us about your situation and what you've done to help other people.
Sure. It started 11 years ago. My husband passed away suddenly, and I found myself a widow at 52, never expecting that. And after about 6 months after Lou died, my friends wanted me to get a life, is what they called it, get a life. And they meant you got to get it back out. And long story short, I really didn't want to start dating again. I'd been married for 26 years and I was very safe at home, but I realized that I needed someone to talk to. And so they said, Deb, try online dating. And at the time, I felt, wow, that's really safe. I've had a lot of friends that have met their significant other through that. Even my mother, one of my mother's best friends, had met a man and ended up getting married to him. So I thought that would be safe. And I went to a faith-based dating site, which led to interesting, the 55 to 65-year-old guys. You know, they showed up and I love to say this, the wife beater t-shirts and the motorcycles. And it was like, oh, it wasn't my kind of guy until I was introduced to a man who had his PhD. He was from London, an international businessman, good looking fella. He was a widower, had a son and a sister in England who I got to know. And it was a family that I thought would be something, good for me. And so we carried on a 2-year online relationship, friendship. Again, it was safe for me. After Lou died, I wasn't ready for anything physical, like close. But it was a really safe relationship online. And I wrote a lot. I think we might have mentioned at one point that I kept a journal through the whole thing. I have 4,000 pages of a printed journal, 5 volumes of journal, which I thought would be family history. And long story short, it turned into, one day he came online and said, Deb, how do you feel about forgiveness? And we had this long spiritual discussion about forgiveness. And I said, what have I done? Why are we talking about forgiveness? And he goes, no, I have something to tell you. I have a confession. And that about gut punched me because I'd heard that once before in my life and it wasn't a good thing. And so I said, are you sure you want to tell me? He goes, I have to tell you, but I need your forgiveness. And long story short, he said, this has all been a scam. At which I said, there's something wrong. You're lying. You've got to prove to me that this has been a scam. And so he goes, I'm going to come on live. Well, for 2 years, I'd asked him to come on live to Skype, or we didn't have FaceTime or any of those back then. And so he walked me through Yahoo Chat and came online live. And I'm looking at my dual screens of my handsome Brit, and up pops this little screen with a dark-haired, dark-eyed, dark-skinned young man with a big smile on his face. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what has happened here? Well, it turns out my Eric turned out to be Joseph. And Joseph was a 30-something-year-old young Nigerian man who had scammed me out of a lot of money over 2 years. And I was just, I hadn't known about that. I didn't know about scams online at the time. I mean, everybody that I knew had a good relationship and a good experience. And I was so blindsided, and my trust in people was just shattered. But, I lost over $1 million. It was $1,080,762. I did not have $1 million. I came up with it because over 2 years, Eric became part of my family. And I like to say even today that I would do anything for my family. But I knew at that point I wasn't going to get it back. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? How can I turn him in? I'd seen a lot of TV. I'd, watched the FBI shows. And I kept him engaged for it was a couple of weeks, only because I was a former Air Force officer, former banker, former paralegal. I knew that I could get him somehow. Wasn't sure how, but I knew that we could get him. And when I went to the FBI the next day with my parents, because I had gotten my parents involved for $100,000, which was the worst part of the whole thing for me. We went to the FBI. The FBI they were cordial. They looked at all the information they had. They looked at all the transactions. I'd kept meticulous records, financial records. And they said, Deb, first off, more men get taken for over $1 million in Palm Beach County, which is where I live. And they'll never tell. Second off, unless you can get them here to the United States, we can't do anything for you. And at that point, I just shut down. That's where my whole woman behind the smile came about. I just put on a smile. I pretended that it just had not worked out. And I didn't know what to do at that point. I was just humiliated. I was vulnerable. I was scared of, my kids were going to blast me the most. I have 4 children, and I was afraid of what they were going to say. But I didn't talk about it except to my mom and dad. And I didn't realize that it was happening to a lot of people until I'd gone to a women's conference, and it was a speaker training, and somebody asked me or said something at lunchtime about online dating, and I rolled my eyes at her, and she goes, "What's that?" And I told her my story, and she said, "Oh, you have to tell." I was like, "I can't tell this story." She goes, "My mom was taken for $80,000 and has no one to talk to." Another woman chimed in. She'd been in a Ponzi scheme twice, and she didn't have anybody to talk to. I mean, I was getting all these women telling me these stories, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, something's happening here. And over that weekend, I transitioned from speaking about my business to speaking about this, because I realized that it happened to me. I couldn't get the money back, but now I needed to do something with what happened and make it a positive experience for other people. Because I have to look at it. My last suit has no pockets. I can't take the money with me. But what happened to me, that experience, I can let others know that it's happening, and happening in a big way, and to just beware and be aware, which is what I love about what you do, is letting people know what's out there and just say, this is what's happening, and choose to be safe. So it was an interesting experience. It was an awful experience, but it's turned out to be a very positive thing for me, because I just want to be there for one person. So that they know they're not alone, and they can speak up and hopefully prevent it from happening by giving them information. And then if not, because if you don't catch them within the first 2 weeks, the scammers are very well trained. They're trained in universities in Nigeria. They know what they're doing. They're like telemarketers 101. If you can't get the victim, survivor, within 2 weeks, you got to wait till they're broken. And that's very difficult when you have a 60, 70, 80-year-old woman come to you and say, "I've lost my home, I've lost my retirement, I've lost all these things because I've fallen in love with this guy." And they're either really angry and in denial and don't want to hear what happened, or they don't know where to go, because now they have nothing. It's devastating. And so out of all bad for me came a lot of good. And I'm grateful for folks like you, Nathan, that are putting the word out there, because it's not being talked about. The media doesn't talk about it. More of the scammers are getting caught. And actually, I just flew to Dallas last week. One fellow was supposed to be in court and one of I work with an organization called SCARS, which is a Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. One of our women, her scammer was picked up in a federal investigation in Dallas, and he's sitting in jail in Dallas, and she was going to give a victim statement. Unfortunately, when we got there, actually the day before we got there, they postponed the case. But few are being caught, and it's usually the ones that are in America, not the ones that are in Nigeria, and in Nigeria, Ghana, and all those, India. I mean, there are scammers everywhere around the world, but typically they don't get caught. And we're trying to make it harder for them to get away with what's going on. But if people don't speak up, most victims don't speak up. And that makes it so difficult to catch them, because I don't think the government or the law enforcement really knows how many people have been taken, because victims are very shy in speaking up. That's the right word.
I think there's a little bit of embarrassment there, as far as, how could I possibly have been fooled into this, and because obviously you wouldn't be participating in this if you didn't believe in your hearts and hearts that this was a legitimate relationship that you were having with this person. So they don't say anything. So it's for people like you that get out there and help spread the word, and then kind of get people to open up a little bit and maybe share a little bit of their story so that somebody else can hear it. And that's one thing I talk about too, is just the more we can share our stories about, whether it be scams or relationship scams or anything like that, with our friends or our family, it turns into the game, like, it spreads, like it's like telephone. Okay, let's let more people know that this is something that's actually happening. And, one thing if you were to give some tips on how these guys, I know you and I talked about this before, how these guys do this, because they don't necessarily target one person, they target several people at the same time. And what are some of the things that people should maybe look out for?
Well, they're targeting a lot of people. And so you're going to find out that they're not going to be using your name. which is interesting. It'll be honey, my love, my wife, my sweetheart. That way they don't screw it up when it's like, they're talking to Dana, but they really say, hey, Debbie. So they do that. If they move off the website, this is a dating site. If they move off a dating site very quickly it was Yahoo Chat back then, but now it's WhatsApp and Yahoo Chats and those kinds of things. If they move you off something safe, relatively safe, very quickly, that's a problem. Realize that it's not just online dating sites. We talk about these romance things, but they're starting on words with games. They're starting as friendships in gaming sites. They're starting in translation. I have a woman in Vietnam. She was on a translation site. A man from England was coming to Vietnam and wanted to learn some banking lingo. So she was teaching him, and it turned into a friendship. She gave him money. That turned out to a scam. So it's not just people looking for love. It's just people looking for friendship. And that's happening all over the world with the pandemic. So be very careful. Watch your family members, your parents. My parents are in their 80s and 90s. They get phone calls. You could get a phishing scam, on a phone or online. Be careful that your elders aren't jumping, because when the grandparent scam, that's for instance, they get these emails, these calls, and they're you don't think, you're just reacting. It's that amygdala hijack. You're just reacting, and you want to help somebody. And they want to send things in the mail. Just watch your bank accounts. Our kids, it's happening. The second biggest group of people being scammed right now are our teenagers, our teenage girls between 13 and 18, because they're looking for friends. They're looking for friendship, and they have access to their parents' credit cards. Mm-hmm. So they may not be giving the scammer money, but they're going and getting gift cards and giving the gift card information out. It starts off. But what I worry about there is that now all these kids are putting their pictures on Instagram. It's all, and you've done that. It's all over social media. So now people know where they are. They know where they look like. They know what's, they're playing lacrosse at 3:00 at the local high school, and it turns into trafficking. So this is a really big issue. Just be careful. If someone is becoming your friend very quickly, if they may not ask for money right off the bat. If they do, it's going to be a small amount, and it's because something happened. Here's a big red flag. If they're military, if they're telling you that they're military, absolutely do not engage in that. I'm a former Air Force officer. I've got kids in the military. Do not engage in that. They are fake. If they are too good to be true, if they're too good looking, too whatever, Google their pictures. They're probably fake. There's so many red flags now. For me, they were pink flags, because although I was well trained in what I did, and many people are extraordinarily well trained, well schooled. I mean, scammers are getting all of us. And this is where when I speak to people, I'm thinking, you may not think it's going to happen to you, and I hope it doesn't, but it could happen to your sister, your mother, your best friend. So just be aware that there's a psychology of a scam that we are all vulnerable to at some point in our life. Mine was because my husband had just died, but they're looking for widows, they're looking for widowers, they're looking for newly divorced folks, people that have something in their life that might make them vulnerable to friendship, and they know how to get you. They know how to just get your heart involved. But if they ask for money really quick, absolutely say no. If they ask for money at all and you've never met them, absolutely say no. And it's very difficult, because you feel after a while that they're your friend, that they're your family. And so many of us just want to help. Don't help. It'd be like walking down the street and giving, $1,000 to the guy sitting on the street. Mm-hmm. There are other ways to do it. Don't do it this way.
So like, for example, so the not seeing them on live streaming nowadays, you could definitely say, let's do something face to face so I can see you. Not that that's going to guarantee anything, because even if showing their true face, they could still be a scammer, but it's going to help somebody who's posting fake pictures of somebody else and saying that they're this really handsome looking person, and meanwhile they're not, like your situation. So that would be something I would definitely encourage people to do, is to do some kind of live streaming.
I used to say, if you haven't seen them in person within 2 weeks, then forget it. Mm-hmm. It's not going anywhere. There's always going to be an excuse. I used to, if you haven't seen the whites of their eyes, that's what I used to say, until I was on the Mel Robbins show, and there was a gal there. She was in her 20s, and she'd been taken by a guy who actually had Instagram videos and Snapchat and all that kind of stuff. He somehow manipulated the way that, I don't even know how they did it, but how you probably know better about this, how they can just change the way the words. And I mean, I look at Netflix a lot now. We watch a lot of European shows, but that are dubbed in English. They're
Mm-hmm.
speaking in French and German, but I'm thinking they're speaking in English. So it's amazing how your brain can, hear what you want to hear, even
Mm-hmm.
though you're seeing something else. So there is that artificial intelligence that they are working this out. And so again, if you haven't seen him or touched him or her in person, even then be careful. But just beware that they are very, very clever. And there's a lot of money in online scamming. The
Mm-hmm.
billions of dollars. It is so underreported that if you can imagine that they've got an economy greater than many countries,
Mm-hmm.
bigger than countries. So the way they can do this is so technologically advanced, and the scammers' brain, they are not stupid guys. They are very well trained, and it is organized crime. They are
Mm-hmm.
criminals, and so it's I. I get so frustrated when I've talked to people and they've come to me and said, but, and I'm like, there's no but involved. If he's asked you for money, if he's not coming to see you, if he's doing these things, he is a scammer, and you must disengage. And it's very difficult once you get sucked in to pull the plug, and you'll be isolated from people. That's what they do. They'll isolate you from your family and your friends, and they'll say, listen to me, don't listen to them. I love you. I want to do this. It's very engaging, and I know I did it for 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
but it leads to awful things: depression, financial devastation. 20 people a day are killing themselves. I mean, it is just awful, and we don't want that to happen. So the best thing for us to do is to speak up and just let people know. If you choose to engage in it after you are fully aware, that's your choice. But all we can say is be careful, and do your due diligence, really do it. And if you have any questions, you ask us. You contact scars. And we've talked before, if you've been scammed, go to againstscams.com, report it. You may not get anything back from the FBI at ic3.gov, but at least they're gathering information.
Mm-hmm.
We have to report it. We have to speak to local law enforcement. There are ways to go in and talk to law enforcement so that when you arrive, you're not showing up as this lunatic that's giving money away. You have to go in and just say, I need an informational report so that I can report it. Maybe I can get some government assistance. Maybe I can get some free therapy, depending on what state you're in. But you have to get that reported. And at SCARS, romancescamsnow.com is an excellent resource for information. Thousands and thousands of articles have been written on romancescamsnow.com about all kinds of scams. Anyscam.com is where you report it. And again, we're collecting that information. We have support groups. People just need to talk to each other and realize they're not alone. Otherwise, you're just going to isolate and recede, and it's not good for you to be alone. And the other thing that happens is after the scam is stopped, there's this huge void. It's like this vacuum, and then you could be scammed again, because they will repeat, they will follow up, they will send other people in, they'll send folks in that are saying that they're investigators, or looking to help you get your money back. They are not going to do that. So there's so many facets to this, Dana. It's really an interesting topic.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's a lot to cover with this. And I think the reporting is a huge, huge deal, because we need to get our arms around how big of a problem this is. We need the government to know how big of a problem that this is. And one thing I want to add, which this is a terrible, terrible thing, but once people are scammed, not only just this scam, but different kinds of scams that are happening, there's a big list down on the dark web of people that fell for things. And then they become targets again, because it's like, we think we're not going to get hit by lightning twice. And because we did fall for something, that we're on the list of people that may be vulnerable to falling for another one. And that's a great list for scammers to have. So
it happens over and over. Most people have been scammed 3 or 4 or 5 times.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, it can happen to anybody. It can happen through the mail. It can happen on the telephone. It can happen through the emails. It can happen, in person. Just be careful. But once you're aware that it's happening, and you'll have had that feeling. I mean, my pink flags, they were really red flags. I just didn't want them to be red flags, because I felt like I knew who he was. Again, I didn't have the information that I have today. If I knew, Not to say that I wouldn't be scammed but I would have a lesser chance of being scammed because of what I know today. But just beware and be aware, because they are out there. They are looking for you. They're not looking for love. They're looking for your money. And they don't need $1 million. They need $250 from a million people.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
They'll start small to see if you bite.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do, they're like, okay, I got a live one.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they're not an individual person. They are groups. So one will start. One is really good at the get to know you stage, and then you'll get transitioned to someone who's better at to develop a relationship, and then you'll get someone who's better as a closer. If you look at telemarketing and look at how these guys work, they are just like telemarketers, and they work.
I never thought about that. That's a good point, that they pass you along.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that. And then a couple of the girls that I work with, they're like, I could tell a difference in the way our conversations were after a certain period of time. I'm thinking, wow, I always wondered how in the world he remembered what we'd always said, because I kept a journal. I had 4,000 pages of journal, and I could go back and see it. They do keep records. They do pass notes. They pass on notes to each other, and they pass the lists around. So yeah, they call it the sucker list, but nobody's a sucker. We are the ones that have been taken advantage of. And when the FBI said that I had been a victim, I was like, I don't want to be a victim. But that's exactly what you are. Mm-hmm. You're manipulated enough, unwittingly. I mean, you're doing it out of the good of your heart, but there is such a psychology to it, and they know it, and they will work you, and they will groom you. And it's really bad with the kids, because they fall so quickly. And I worry about the kids, and I worry about my grandparents. I mean, I was able to recover. I've actually remarried. Most people don't open their hearts up again. I was bound and determined not to let the scammer get the best of me. But most of the ladies that I work with are just devastated, and they don't know how to make a financial transaction anymore. They don't trust themselves anymore. Their family members and their friends might have shunned them and said, "Oh, that's really stupid of you." Don't ever do that, because the victim is blaming themselves more than anybody else can blame them. And that forgiveness of the scammer, forgiveness of themselves, is really important. And they need support. They need a therapist if they can get there. They need someone to talk to. They need a support group to realize they're not alone. That's really important. Otherwise, that's when it leads to depression, and leads to, I'll never get out of this. I can't. My retirement's gone. What do I do? I'm 75 years old. I'm going to lose my house. It's really an awful thing. And we don't want our moms and dads to go through that, nonetheless ourselves.
No, that's for sure. And another great thing that you've done is you have created that community where people can go and talk to people that have been through the same kind of situation. And that is a huge, huge benefit for somebody to have a group to go speak with. So I'm glad you're doing that. Yeah. So what's the best way for everybody to get in touch with you or to find out about, your websites?
Well, they can I always say, if someone has been scammed and they want someone to email me. It's Debby, Debby, at thewomanbehindthesmile.com. I have my own webpage. I have a weekly show called Stand Up and Speak Up. We do address this on that show. I'm also on the board of directors of SCARS, the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. The best way there is to go to romancescamsnow.com. Information, unbelievable amount of information, and that's where they can get hooked into our support groups and our Facebook groups. So again, it's not it's not a cure for anything. We can't get your money back. We can just help you understand that this is what happened. It's a reality in your life, and there are steps to take now to recover, and you can't do it alone. It's so much easier if you've got someone there to hold your hand through it. So.
Yeah, absolutely, like everything. So I'm sorry that you went through this whole thing, but luckily you came out the other side, and now you're remarried, and you're helping all these other people. So something really, really fabulous came out of something very, very devastating. So thank you very much for sharing your story with all of us.
My pleasure, Dana. Thanks for sharing it with the others.
Yes, definitely. We got to spread the word, everybody. Spread the word. So thank you, Debby, for your time. I appreciate that very, very much. And
my pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. So till then, be well. See you on the next episode.